Good morning, everybody. On behalf of New York Law School and Dean Anthony Crowell, I welcome you to the 185th City Law Breakfast. They began in 1994. I am Ross Sandler, professor of law and the director of the Center for New York City Law. Thank you for attending and for helping to make these City Law Breakfasts an important public forum. I want to thank our three generous and loyal founding sponsors, Consolidated Edison, Verizon, and the law firm of Greenberg Traurig. And then I want to thank also all of you who've contributed when you signed up for the breakfast. We are especially happy with the voluntary contributions, and each of you will be listed in the email after this breakfast when we send around the video link for the breakfast. We are enormously grateful for the voluntary contributions and our founding sponsors that have made these breakfasts possible. Those of you who attended before, you know that after the Deputy Mayor's prepared remarks, we will have a question and comment session. To submit a question or a comment, please use the Q&A function on your Zoom screen. You may submit a question or comment at any time, and we encourage you to do so. We collect the questions and comments as they come in. Please identify yourself with your first and last name and your organization. And then after the Q&A, we'll have a commentary or a colloquy with Dean Crowell and the Deputy Mayor. We are delighted to welcome Deputy Mayor Meera Joshi to our City Law Breakfast series. This is the third time that Meera Joshi has spoken at a City Law Breakfast. On the prior occasions in 2015 and 2018, she was serving as chair of the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission. And the topic at the time was the future of the yellow cab industry and the regulation of the new ride-sharing services like Uber and Lyft that have overwhelmed the city's traditional taxi services. After leaving the TLC, Meera Joshi worked in the private sector and then held a high federal position as administrator of the U.S. Department of Transportation's Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. Mayor Eric Adams brought Meera Joshi back from Washington to New York City as Deputy Mayor for Operations. As Deputy Mayor, she oversees New York City's infrastructure portfolio. The agencies are, and this is a long list, environmental protection, transportation, sanitation, design and construction, parks, buildings, and the Taxi and Limousine Commission. This is a huge and demanding portfolio. To meet these challenges, she brings a deep knowledge of city government. Meera Joshi started with the city in 2002 with the Department of Correction and then moved to the Civilian Complaint Review Board. She then became general counsel and later chair of the Taxi and Limousine Commission. Each of these three agencies, Correction, Civilian Complaint Review Board, and the Taxi and Limousine Commission, faced intense public scrutiny and controversy. Meera Joshi's experiences at these agencies will be useful as she oversees New York City's infrastructure and core services. We are proud to welcome Meera Joshi back to New York Law School. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ross. Thank you for continuing this wonderful tradition. And thank you to everyone who's chosen to join this morning. The City Law Series is a New York City jewel. It's one of the few forums where the public can hear about how government operations, and I mean this in the very broadest sense, actually work from the people doing the work. And it gives the public a chance to ask questions. There's no barriers to entry, there's no fees, there's no membership required. And I'm certain when we get back to in-person, there will again be food. And in government, where there's an unflattering history and practice of lobbyists and those with means being the only ones who get the greatest access to frank executive level explanations of how and why things are done in New York City, the City Law Series is an oasis for transparency and civic involvement. And to speaking here today, I aspire to live up to these twin goals. So I wear my numbers proudly, 115, 151, and now 185th. And I hope to make it to the 200s and beyond. I know the City Law Series will. So I'm Meera Joshi, Deputy Mayor for Operations for the City of New York. Within my portfolio, which I get the honor of working on with a stellar team, including former Borough President of Staten Island, Jimmy Otto, I oversee all of the city's hard infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, municipal and cultural buildings, schools, sewers, resiliency walls, parks and shorelines, as well as our infrastructure services, the services that every New Yorker depends on every day, such as running water, flushing toilets, and trash pickup. That's almost 7,000 miles of roads, just shy of 800 bridges, 12,000 tons of trash collected daily, 1 billion gallons of water supplied every day, 30,000 acres of parkland, and 2.5 million trees, and 1.3 gallons of toilet water that's treated every day. And that's a lot of successful flushes. That's just an example of the scope of our portfolio. It's the infrastructure foundation that allows those that are born in New York, those who come to live in New York and visit, the security and the certainty to follow their dreams. The hard question is, in a world of increasing and meaningful accountability layers and unavoidable and unpredictable delays, oversight hearings, notices, checks and balances, new protocols, procurement procedures, cost escalation, supply chain disruption, necessary mandates to reduce climate impacts, resiliency priorities, worldwide viruses, and the attendant cost escalations. How do we not only keep this foundation in the state of good repair, while at the same time advancing our foundation through innovative improvements? It certainly feels like swimming upstream against a current of absolutely laudable goals and constant seismic crisis. To steal a line from a recent Ezra Klein op-ed in the New York Times, pondering the United States' current inability to build better and faster, when you construct a new building or a subway tunnel or a highway, you have to navigate neighbors and communities and existing roads and emergency access vehicles and politicians and beloved views of parks and the possibility of an earthquake, and on and on and on. So no better time for New York City than now to have a get stuff done mayor, a mayor who dives right into the most complex urban problems, our mental health crisis, subway safety, street homelessness, and emerges with concrete, practical solutions, the results of which New Yorkers can see. And when it comes to operations and all of the operational agencies, he instills and demands the same of his executives. So maybe like a moth to a flame, operations under the Adams administration is not shying away from the city's most intractable infrastructure problems. We are entangling them with an excess of common sense, as well as endurance and a very, very thick skin, which comes in handy because it involves a lot of ripping of Band-Aids. Some examples: the BQE. A recent headline captures the sentiment. How do you solve a problem like the BQE? The Adams administration inherited a highway horror, a critical transportation corridor. Over 130,000 vehicles travel it daily, long past its intended useful life. Administration after administration have poked the BQE bare. Proposals to reconstruct, panels to advise, plans to waterproof and preserve. From 2006 to 2011, New York State DOT studied and planned the BQE. From 2014 to 2018, New York City did the same. In 2019, a citywide panel was convened, more studying. And the last administration decided to preserve the BQE via waterproofing to add another 20 years of life to the structure, and then to be determined. The prior reflective approach is understandable. The center of the BQE, the cantilever section, sits smack in between a park and a neighborhood and right on top of critical city infrastructure. Construction in this narrow zone is easily equatable to doing construction in the eye of a needle. And the rest of the BQE is arguably more troubling in its discriminatory effect it's had on neighborhoods. It cuts through with complete disregard to the communities it ripped apart in its path. Ripping the Band-Aid off, the Adams administration is facing the challenges of the entire BQE corridor head on. We will not let our children inherit this open transportation wound that generations have chosen to ignore. And the time is right. The public, and rightfully so, is demanding action. The mayor and the governor regularly share a stage and the mutual goal of improving the lives of New Yorkers together. And this is a regional challenge. And the federal government has provided once-in-a-generation infrastructure funding opportunities for needy projects just like the BQE. We're actively engaged with communities up and down the BQE corridor on developing plans to reconnect their neighborhoods, create more public space, and hide the highway. More immediately, later this year, we'll be implementing safety improvements along the corridor. Some of these intersections under the BQE are the most dangerous in the city, as well as on-the-ground public space improvements. For the central cantilever portion, we intensely monitor the structure through sensors and in-person inspections. It's likely one of the most monitored structures on the East Coast, and we're doing a series of additional safeguard work in the spring. So yes, there will be disruption. We're well in the process of community outreach on 3 design ideas for reconstruction of the cantilever, and we begin the environmental review process later this year with an anticipated construction start date of 2027. Make no mistake, this work is hard. It will not be painless, but it is the necessary action that needs to happen to secure and improve our city's foundation. And talking about construction, the Adams administration is actively warring against growing construction delays and ballooning budgets. Essentially, how can we build better, faster, and cheaper without sacrificing safety, innovative design, labor protections, and opportunities for our minority and women-owned businesses? Can we have it all? Yes, we can. Tall order, but we're smart. We did not attempt to tackle this challenge alone. In early 2022, we convened a task force of capital agencies, the men and women who juggle delays and growing budgets, as well as take the brunt from the public displeasure at both. They truly want to see the city succeed. Our contractors, the businesses, large and small, and NWBE that do the work, or sadly are forced out of it because of restrictive procurement practices, medieval paper requirements, and delays in payment that just can't be floated, putting small businesses out of business. Our city controller, with accountability as our mutual North Star, his input has been essential. And through this process, we arrived at three consensus city actions and 9 consensus state amendments that would markedly move the needle. Even more radical, this same group traveled to Albany on Monday and Tuesday of this week. We put on our sneakers, loaded up on snacks, water bottles, and one-pagers, and met with elected after elected to explain this common sense approach and why it needs to be law. Many electeds had never seen a deputy mayor and a city controller surrounded by city contractors, all advocating for the same meaningful change. This stuff is technical. It's not headline material, but the results most certainly are. In short, the combined effect of these recommendations is that we would give the city agencies and our qualified contractors the right amount of flexibility to do their job. The result, projects are completed in years earlier and under budget. The real result, New Yorkers get the infrastructure that they need. For example, without flexibility, it took us 6 years to get to a signed contract for the East Side Coastal Resiliency Wall. Compare that with Battery Park Authority, able to use an alternative delivery tool, progressive design build, which we're advocating for. They were able to get to a signed contract for their resiliency wall in under a year. During COVID, when emergency conditions allowed procurement restrictions to be lifted, we were able to build health centers in about 192 days. That's about 6 months. Normally, these would take 6 years. And with projects where there's multiple individual site locations, these tools mean that instead of waiting for all 100+ sites to be fully designed before we're allowed to bid out work, the design and construction team can work in concert. These projects are not only done without sacrificing safety standards, they are done with improved insurance coverage and standards, improved labor protections, and create more mentoring and business opportunities for MWBE partners. So call your legislator. 4 of our recommendations are already in the governor's budgets, and we're working hard to get in all 9. So New Yorkers don't have to wait a lifetime for a bathroom in a park or a life-saving resiliency wall. Another intractable problem, all the food that we throw away. For almost a decade, the city has struggled with how to pull 1/3 of our trash out of our waste stream, use it for good and not evil, and save us the expense and the climate impacts of sending it to landfill, the elusive concept of organics collection. Asking New Yorkers to separate their food scraps for years has been viewed by many as a cultural change we were either too weak or too entrenched to make. So as a city, we started small opt-in sign-up programs with bespoke collection routes. We didn't cover the entire city. In reality, through these programs, what we actually did was we covered those people in New York who were already inclined and also already had the time and energy to engage with a program that required proactive work. The results were costly and the collection low. So last year, we ripped the Band-Aid off. Instead of a program where New Yorkers have to seek out opportunities to put their food scraps to higher use, we just gave it to them, curbside and with their normal collection. And we didn't pick districts or other hard to find geographies. We just gave it to the whole borough of Queens. What happens when you go big and you bring the services to New Yorkers instead of asking them to find you? We're government, so we're constantly in camouflage. That's difficult. Really good things happen. Queenside Organics Core program diverted 12.7 million pounds of material in its short first season. One district in Queens covering Jamaica, Hollis, St. Albans, and Springfield that had never participated in an organics collection before diverted more yard and food waste than the entire legacy opt-in program. And all of this was achieved with less than 1/3 of the cost of prior programs. That's the trash that instead of going into a landfill, goes into our DEP digester eggs and is turned into compost and even can be turned into gas and sold back to the national grid. And as announced in the state of the city, we're going citywide. The same common sense approach and the same absolutely undeniable citywide benefits, climate, financial, and a huge step towards taking away the food source from rats. Another lifelong problem, scaffolding. Technically labeled sidewalk sheds, scaffolding's permanence on our streets is not debatable. As the comedian David Sedaris asked, how often is the scaffolding actually older than the building it surrounds? Its stated purpose is truly purposeful and essential safety. In 1979, 17-year-old Grace Gold was killed when a chunk of masonry fell from a building and hit her on the head. Thereafter, pursuant to Local Law 10 and later Local Law 11, most buildings are subject to regular inspections, and failing that inspection or doing construction on your building means scaffolding goes up. And over the years, because the specifications for scaffolding are sound, but not pretty, and the cost and consequences are not enough to inspire movement, the scaffolding stays. And it stays in all its metal and green glory, darkening streets and obstructing views of our magnificent city. Today, we have over 2 million linear feet of scaffolding, and the average time that it stays up is 500 days, or just shy of 500 days. For an in-depth look, you can actually see real-time scaffolding map on New York City Department of Buildings website. So the mayor announced in the state of the city, and actually together with the governor announced as part of the new New York panel, we're ripping off the Band-Aid. We're tackling the problem of building owners who opt to use scaffolding as a substitute for actual repairs through targeted enforcement against long-standing scaffolding up for 3 or more years, and ensuring that the underlying safety repairs are made. And we're going after what's been described as soul-deadening green and steel that's taken over our streets through updated specifications that take into account public space, visibility, and aesthetics, as well as being solid support and affordable. It's not a unicorn, it's actually possible. We'll be pursuing these regulatory options in the coming months, and in the short term, we'll be allowing other colors, alternative lights, and the use of netting as substitutes for scaffolding. A few more items containing our trash. This spring, huge shift. We're changing the set out times for trash. Nationally and internationally, New York City trash bags spend the longest time on the curb, and this has been the case for decades. Despite the bad reputation, the bad look, and the even worse stench, city government has not altered this reality. The prospect of pushback from many who don't like change loomed large. So prior attempts fizzled and resulted only in incremental and toothless requirements, such as a mandated trash plan for some businesses. Another Band-Aid off, no half-stepping here. This spring, that all changes. Starting in April, you cannot set your trash out until 8 p.m. And if you really have to put it out earlier, you can put it out by 6 p.m., but it must be in a container. Yes, we're bringing back Oscar the Grouch and trash cans, and the rats won't like that either. More broadly, we're completing a study on long-term strategies to containerize New York City, one which would recognize the density and diversity of our city, and one city with few alleyways. Another step forward, electrifying our for-hire fleet. By 2030, all high-volume for-hire operators must operate at zero emissions. That's a responsibility of the company, not the driver. The company has to make it work financially for the driver. And it's a mandate. Today, it's Uber and Lyft, but it applies to any operator that provides more than 10,000 trips a day in New York City. These are just a few bold examples. Plan NYC is due out in a few months, so stay tuned for an action-packed climate agenda that is also bold. And all of this hard work is exciting work, and it will not be painless. But as we've learned through COVID and our extreme and devastating weather events, we do this important and foundational work now in non-viral times, in relatively sunshiny times, because only then will we be stronger in crisis and absolutely fabulous every other day of the week. Thank you very much, and I welcome questions and comments.
Well, that was really a long list of important topics, and thank you for laying them out and with such substance. We'll start with questions. I want to start with one from Kendall Christensen, who asks about the appointment of such things as the high-profile czars like rats, public realm, and so forth. How does that work, you ask? Who supervises it, and where, and which agencies have jurisdiction over those new appointments?
Great question. So that was one example I didn't include, so I'm glad you raised it, because I debated whether or not to include it, but I was running out of time to list examples. So we recently appointed a public czar, that's Ya-Ting Liu, who reports to Deputy Mayor of Operations. And the function there is one that actually has been called out by those advocating for public space improvements for a long time. We are a very complex city. And so when it comes to public space, the division of responsibility is often split between many agencies. And in order to coordinate to ensure that public space improvements happen quickly and make sense, the coordination has to rest with City Hall. Previously, we haven't given one person that defined role. And so there has been some misunderstanding from the public about how do you reach out, how do you make impactful comments to ensure that coordination happens, and who's accountable for that coordination. We changed that with the appointment of a public realm czar. And so that will be the central point for organizing such bold plans that we laid out in State of the City, which will add miles of public space to our all boroughs, and including permanent open streets in many of our boroughs.
Okay. Again, you may submit questions on the Q&A, and I hope you do. There were so many topics discussed that there has to be a bunch of questions coming in. Here's one asking about, this comes in from an anonymous. We do ask you to give your name. I think it's helpful that the names are given and organizations, so we do ask that. But here's one from an anonymous person asked about, given the questions about implementation of the congestion pricing, what do you think about the suggestion that former DOT Commissioner Lou Riccio wrote about in Daily News about implementing a licensing fee on Uber Lyft cars as that could be done now?
Excellent. So, in my former role, I was on the front lines of understanding the impact of Uber and Lyft's fleets as they grew and congestion within our city, especially congestion in our central business district. We do have, as you know, already a congestion surcharge for the vehicles, the Uber and Lyft vehicles that was enacted by the state in 2019 and 2020. It came into effect. And the congestion pricing would add on to that. I think one of the things, and what I like about the Riccio approach is it focuses on the companies as the ones orchestrating the fleets, the transportation network of the fleet or the geography that the fleet covers, as opposed to the driver. And many of our trip by trip or day by day fees have the unintended consequence of really having an impact on a specific driver, because the passenger, even though it's a pass-through fee, experiences a higher charge. And that often drivers feel is reflected on sort of the relationship, and often even the tip that they might get from a passenger, because they're seen as the guilty party, the one charging the higher fee. When you have a fee that is actually the responsibility of the company, there's many different ways that they can handle that. But ultimately, it is the company rather than the individual driver that is the responsible party. And in this case, it is the company that is reaping the greatest benefits out of the operation. So it actually absolutely makes sense.
Thank you on that. Let me ask you a question going back to your legislative package. Could you be a little more specific about what is in the package and the items that have not been adopted so far by the governor?
So I'm glad you asked. I didn't want to bore people with the technicalities of it, but I'm happy to answer any of them. So a core piece of it is giving the city alternative delivery tools. We have the ability to use design build. Our traditional process is 3 steps: design, bid, build. Has all kinds of awkward results, resulting in wonderful designs, but then we get a low bid contractor and they may not be equipped to construct a beautifully designed building. Design build takes care of some of those problems, but what we're advocating now for is progressive design build, where we pick a qualified contractor and we actually scope out the contract together. This is especially important when you have resiliency projects. You select your qualified contractor, you rip the street open together, you actually look and find the unknown before you scope it out. That allows for realistic scoping of the project. The contractor and the city are working together to scope it out. It's open book, so we can account for how much each component costs. And ultimately, we're given a maximum guaranteed price that reduces change orders. It reflects the realistic scope of the construction. And I think on this one, a lot of people have questions about where's the accountability mechanism on pricing. And that's why it's really important to emphasize on this effort, the controller is standing with us. Our accountability expert is with us on this because we've seen how important it can be to move capital projects along. I'll give you 2 other examples. It's a list of 9 that I think are, shows sort of the absolute common sense. 1, electronic bidding. We can't submit, our contractors cannot submit electronically. They're required to bring mountains of paperwork to an entire office at DDC that hosts this paperwork. That takes time, that takes money, and that takes people. And that actually might be the reason why some small businesses can't compete. Electronic bidding is easier, it's more cost effective, and it actually creates more accountability. You know exactly when a bid is submitted when it's done electronically. Getting rid of some hearing requirements. There are some hearing requirements that are really holdovers from a time before the internet. We have the internet now. We can put all the information about the contract on the internet, and we can use that as a portal to collect comments. But adding 3 to 4 weeks on the timeline of a project for really historically poorly attended public hearings doesn't seem to make sense. Requiring a citywide or allowing for a citywide mentorship program for MWBE contractors, raising the threshold for discretionary MWBE contracts, and allowing for wraparound insurance policies so that the main contractor can hold the insurance. rather than every single subcontractor having to get their own insurance policy, often resulting in delays from cross claims, and again, excluding small and minority businesses because those insurance policies can be very financially burdensome.
Very good. Here's a follow-up on the question from Paul Gottsagen. Speaking about design build, he says, how does that allow for earlier usage of the project when you have to surmount all the final sign-offs by agencies, insurance, health, multiple safety, and other important requirements? So he's sort of challenging the theory behind design build.
Well, it's, those sign-offs have to happen, but do they happen in a 3-step process, or do they happen in a 2-step process, or in a 1-step process? As you lower the steps and you combine and add the flexibility of the design and the construction to go together, then you actually allow for a more efficient process. Take, for example, different job, city DOT. Has to do ped ramps across the city. Now they have to design, as I said in my talk, each one separately and bid out each individually. If they have a construction, construction manager approach, they can actually just have a design for all 100 and proceed as one procurement. That reduces the amount of sign-offs.
Here's from Kirk Ricci. Can you comment and clarify how the Department of Sanitation and DEP are coordinating to digest organic waste that is collected and the system collection expands to the city? In other words, how are they coordinating?
So they're started with, they've always done some of it, but we're looking to enhance it, and it's a couple different ways. One, we have to build out more infrastructure within DEP so they can handle a larger load. Two, we have to understand what are the highest and best uses for the end product. Is it compost? Is it gas? What can it be used for? And I think 3, it's actually the logistics. So like as you're trucking organics through the city, making sure we're matching it with the closest digester, because the last thing we want to do in trying to reduce the climate impacts of trash is increase the climate impacts of trucks hauling organics material throughout the city. So that seems like a small, but it's actually a huge detail to coordinate the drop-off, so we're reducing those miles.
Here's a question from Barbara Blair. And revisiting local law 11, is revisiting local law 11 worth revisiting in terms of the frequency of inspections, or using drones or some other less intensive mechanism for inspections to minimize scaffolding?
So I'm glad you mentioned drones. I mean, our school construction authority uses drones now to really get a snapshot of the integrity of a building. And that's absolutely technology that we need to explore, because we have used scaffolding as the first line of defense against a faulty facade or ongoing construction, but it is no longer the only option there. There are drones that can, through more frequent inspections, get to the root of the problem. And there's also things like netting, which can be put up in place. But the thing about the drones is you can have an absolutely, I would say, almost more comprehensive view, and you can do it more frequently, which is the key to inspection. In order to really have a sense of the security of the facade of a building, you need to have more constant inspection. So we do use it in government. Other jurisdictions are using drones for building inspections. And so we're absolutely exploring how we could expand that to our own Department of Buildings.
Here's a question, maybe in your area, from Mary McCory, about Fresh Direct and other companies that use the sidewalks for deliveries. Does the city receive revenue from these companies for the private use of public space?
Excellent question. And this was a topic that I was going to include, but I didn't. So I'm glad it came up in this question and answer period. So we have, it was like up until the 30s or so, we didn't allow people to park on the streets. That was considered an abuse of public space. And now we flipped completely, and it's, the first default is that the public space should be used for parking. Now we've gone even further, because now that public space is also used as a loading and unloading zone. by companies, and they really essentially have a business that doesn't incur any overhead because they're using our public space for a critical part of their business. So we're engaging in and this was featured again in the New York panel, a curb management plan where we use our ability to price the curb, especially our ability now that's under our parking authority, our ability to price for parking, to extend that to create loading and unloading zones. So those are designated places that we determine actually work. And I think the critical point that was raised in the question, there's a price for that. So that it is no longer us giving free loading and unloading zones away to companies, but we're pricing the curb and we're organizing the way in which that happens. Because the current state allows for one, a sense of chaos, and two, a really no way to compensate the city for the infrastructure dollars we invest in making sure that that curb space and that roadway is kept up in shape.
Here's a question from Mark LeBeau. He asks a little bit more about the scaffolding. What required scaffolding can or should be replaced by netting, he asks.
So I think that that is a matter of engineering balance. So there is some situations, and the Department of Buildings will be looking into this, where the netting would be adequate security, and some where we would feel that that wouldn't be, and we'd need the safety of scaffolding itself. But we know that netting is an option in some circumstances, and the real genesis of this endeavor is to identify where we can give people that additional option rather than always going to the default of full scaffolding.
Okay, here's a question from Mark Diller. The serial 30-day extensions for making planning for community boards, talking about the open meetings law and other public bodies difficult, having to arrange in-person venues, many of whom who don't want us back yet. I'm not sure what that means. Only to have extension at the last minute. Is there a longer-term planning estimate? You're talking about these community boards and other public hearings associated with infrastructure.
So if I understand the accurately, it is there a plan to reduce the amount of community board input or council input as it relates to infrastructure projects?
It's a limit, I guess, reducing the number of in-person venues, having remote.
Oh, so allowing for remote, absolutely something that we will look into. And there was a change, obviously during COVID, around what met the open meetings law requirement, allowing for virtual, and some of those have been withdrawn, and so many places are going back to in-person. But that's a good, that relates not just to infrastructure, but so many things that the city endeavors when planning for community board and scheduling for community board meetings becomes another reason that they are extended. And I will just say this on the virtual front, although I don't love virtual, I look forward to in-person events at New York Law School, especially. Virtual does allow for additional participation. So it's not just about cutting the time and making it easier to plan. It's also about broadening the group of people that can participate in these kinds of outreach events.
Here's a question that goes back in time with some of the stuff I was doing years ago. This is from Philip Turgenev. What is the current plan for installing public bathrooms around the city?
So maybe we should answer this in tag team. And I remember reading, I think it was a piece or an interview with Dan Doctoroff, who bemoaned the hard uphill battle it was to get one public bathroom in. So under Bloomberg, there was plans to get many public bathrooms in, and I think about 5 got in. We have a contract with our bus shelterman, provider that promises many more public bathrooms. And we have an ongoing, endeavor with the City Parks Department on trying to have modular comfort stations and exploring more sturdy, portable comfort stations. The pushback that I know you may remember this also, Ross, is often the community board that doesn't want a public restroom in its area. Yet I think that we're ignoring a reality, especially in an age where we're so dependent on delivery workers who bring us our food, or transportation workers who bring us our packages. They don't have an office, they don't have a home base, they don't have a bathroom. So the need for public restrooms in a world where we're so dependent on everything coming to our doorstep is greater and greater. So we're pursuing how to build them faster and cheaper, both through the DOT and the Parks Department. And this is one of those painful moments where there will be lots of community people that don't want a restroom in their area, and you have to balance that with the actual need to pee, right? Like there's people out there working that need to pee. And this is very real, but we had this at TLC as well. There's health consequences to this. Drivers suffer if they don't have adequate access to bathrooms. So Ross, I don't know if you have anything you want to add from your experience with this perennial challenge, but we are not going to be dissuaded and will continue to try to forge ahead in improving access to public restrooms.
I would only add that with respect to this problem, time is of the essence.
Yeah.
Tamara Phil Ami, she says, good morning. And she raises a question about the homeless population. Is New York Connect housing an effective service? I don't know if this falls within your bailiwick, but it's an important question.
It doesn't actually, but I'm more than happy to confer with my colleague, Deputy Mayor Ann Williams-Isom, who is the expert on this, and we'll be pleased to get back to you, Ross, if you want to follow up with the answer.
Okay. And this is from Alice Blank. And again, going back to your progressive design build, can you describe how progressive design build will ensure robust public engagement and design excellence? Can you provide successful examples of this program in the city today?
So in our Albany lobbying trip, we were accompanied, as I said, by the controller as well as many city contractors. And one of the contractors that came with us was Turner Construction. And Turner Construction, as well as a few other companies, has just signed a contract with Battery Park Authority to build the Battery Park resiliency wall. And the question came up in discussions with electeds about outreach and accountability. And what she was able to speak to was the fact that progressive design build has actually increased the amount of outreach that they do on a construction project versus design build and design bid build. And that is because the outreach is infused in each, because the steps are collapsed. The outreach is part of each of that collapsed process. And so they're not just discussing things in isolation like design and then construction problems, they're discussing it all together. So the irony with this added flexibility, which the feeling is if you have flexibility, you must be losing something, is that you're not. You're getting more outreach, you're getting more engagement with the public on more of the substantive issues around construction and design at the same time.
I'm going to ask a question myself about the BQE since nobody else has. I was on the panel and we recommended a 4-lane highway, in part because of the immense and incomprehensible difficulty of the detour during the years of construction. And we thought that would be the best solution. And we also thought that the 20-year solution was a very rational way to approach the problem. It was not kicking the can forward. It was really a way of providing the transportation and then moving to a time period 20 years from now where we may not want an interstate size highway. So I'd like to just ask a little bit more about, could you explain a little bit more about the thinking of the administration currently?
Sure. On the 20-year plan, I would love to have a 20 years from now, we don't need the highway, but I also don't want to be unrealistic. And also about two things: one, traffic and the kinds of crises that do come and really stop all progress on every front. And we've seen that twice. We saw that with COVID. We see that with supply chain disruptions. We don't live in a world where we can plan out 10 years and assume that we're going to make that deadline, or plan out 20 years and assume that we're going to make that deadline. It is a major transportation thoroughfare for the region and one of the only options for trucks in Brooklyn. 90% of our goods come through truck. We do need to work, and we've started working with the RPA on a regional freight plan that will take trucks off the BQE and off other highways and put that freight on barges. We're an island, so we have the benefit of, lots of good drop-off points. We need to take advantage of them. But we do have to be realistic that this is a roadway that is used by many, not for a Sunday drive, but to get to work, because either they don't have the transportation options or they're required to have mobility at work, or for the freight that we're all, checking add to cart and adding to our internet accounts, and it's got to come somewhere. So I just wouldn't want to bet on a plan that left the problem for our children with what might be an idealistic hope for the future. At the same time, the structure is very well monitored, but it will need to be reconstructed. It is not going to last for 100 years. On the 2 and 3 lanes, we are heard lots of feedback, both from people in the Brooklyn Heights community that would like a permanent structure to have 2 lanes, as well as from electeds and people that live north and south that would like to see 3 lanes. And rather than deciding based on who has the louder or most convincing argument, because that may not give us the accurate picture, as part of our environmental review, we're studying traffic analysis of both 2 and 3 lanes. And 2 lanes to narrow the footprint, to reduce the incentive to add more traffic to the highway, and 3 lanes for those that are concerned that it has had an effect on neighborhoods north and south, that it's pushing that traffic to local streets and creating congestion and environmental problems for their communities. So the truth, the statistics and the actual traffic analysis will be the decision-making point. And I think that is the publicly transparent way to move forward.
Okay, well, stay tuned. It's going to be a big issue over time. And thank you for your responses on all the questions, and thank all the questioners who submitted such good questions. We appreciate that. And at least for me, I think the question period is one of the most important parts that we do here, to give our speaker a chance to think about some of the issues that are on the mind of other people who are listening. Now I want to bring in Dean Anthony Crowell for a colloquy. Dean Crowell, are you ready? Here we go.
He is.
Dean Crowell, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you, Ross, and nice to see you, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Nice
always
to
ready
see
for
you.
a conversation with you, my old friend. Or I should say longstanding friend. One of the things I know that we've talked about over the years is about how much culture matters, and that government is a work in progress. And often the public, I think the public knows that, but doesn't always connect with the concept as well as those of us in public service would like them to. Can you talk a little bit about the culture in the Adams administration, and both the challenges of getting the public to understand all the extraordinarily hard work that's going on and efforts, and how you see a good plan is to engage the community in a better understanding and appreciation of it?
I think that this is a really pivotal topic, because oftentimes in government, if you don't take yourself out of your role and put yourself in the shoes of someone looking in, you're going to end up, 1, convincing yourself all the time that you're on the right path, and 2, just using words and lingo and processes that are absolutely incomprehensible to the outside world. And not because the outside world isn't educated, interested, and trying to understand, but over the years, we've created a sort of way to speak in tongues almost in government. And that's like something that really doesn't help anyone. Mayor Adams is not one who likes to make things overly complicated. I'm sure people who have heard him speak know that he is direct, he is plain, and he wants to be transparent. He wants to give New Yorkers the news, even when it's bad news. And I think that's a really critical part. If there is going to be a delay in a project, why is there going to be a delay in a project? If we don't have the money to do something, here's why we don't have the money to do something. If we are embarking on it, here's what the exact timeline is. And it is that kind of clear, solid, practical information that allows New Yorkers to have a better understanding of how their government is working, and also gives them some sense of, reliability, right? I know that this government is going to be able to give me that information. I started off with, singing the praises of the City Law series, but it truly is an example of you really need to give people access to executives in government to have frank conversations. You're not going to agree on everything. All of what we do will be painful and disruptive, but we'd rather people understand the why and give us comments that we can bring back than to just have a sort of a defensive posture, which I think serves nobody. And that goes a long way in changing culture.
Yeah, I think that is a very wise approach. Certainly, the Bloomberg administration was very committed to making sure that people understood not only the actions being taken, but the data that supported those actions, and that was created as a result of those actions to measure progress. And I thought that was something that really enabled both the administration to succeed, but also bring the residents of the city along in a way that they could appreciate, the challenges, but also the benefits that were being realized. We were talking a little bit before about the public realm and looking out on the vast space that is New York City and all the things. And I know that First Deputy Mayor Pat Harris was extraordinary at thinking about that and creating extraordinary parks and spaces and public art and bringing arts and culture to all 5 boroughs. Can you talk a little bit more about the role of the new Chief for Public Realm and what that ultimately looks like, and what you envision the results to be in this new era?
Yeah, it's really shepherding projects large and small. So we have some amazing large scale projects on the horizon. Queensway in Queens that looks to take advantage of an old rail line and turn it into a linear park. Redesign, rethinking Fifth Avenue so that it becomes a destination, not just for shoppers, but for those that want to go from our 2 jewels of Bryant Park to Central Park and create a boulevard. But we have some smaller and really important, smaller only in size, but not in significance, public realm issues with our commercial corridors who are battling trash, some trash problems, graffiti problems, and things like that actually make it difficult for them to keep the vibrancy of their commercial corridor. The public realm officer coordinates that work, whether it be large scale or small scale. That's a combination of really bringing together and getting consensus and movement from the invested city agencies, which are generally city DOT, sanitation, DEP, buildings, our bids, so our community organizers and our bids, as well as from the general public. And that is not an easy feat. So it sounds easy to list all of those off, but everybody has a specific opinion and everybody is very loyal to their process. So a lot of the work that Yating has been doing, she's recently gotten the title, but she's been in the background doing this work ever since early 2022, is literally bringing those groups together, isolating those issues and breaking them up and making people make changes to process because they can see the greater good, that there will be movement on a project. And that's really the essential work of the public realm officer. It sounds a lot more glamorous, but day to day, that's what it is.
Well, it is glamorous. The results are glamorous, and nothing you never realize the hard work that goes into something that that looks so easy and effortless. And that is actually the mark of the hard work. Let's talk a little bit about you for a second. We have a few more minutes. When I first met you, you were in a significant government oversight role, working with DOI and Department of Correction. You also were then, later on in your career, in a very significant regulatory role at TLC, but now you're in City Hall, Deputy Mayor for Operations, sort of one of the greatest jobs in city government. Two questions. One, how did those roles prepare you well for this position? And what is it that you have learned that you didn't think you would learn, or that surprises you most now that you're in a very big chair?
So I think what's prepared me most was I had many jobs with a tremendous amount of disruption and public feedback, and understanding that, don't take that personally. Also, don't ignore that. Like, the jewels of information are in a lot of those public interactions, whether it's someone screaming at you or them writing a very nice typed letter. You can't ignore it, whatever the form. But you also don't have to take it personally. It's part of our job. It's how we function better when we're open to that. So that is extremely helpful. Having an investigative background is helpful because I stay curious. So much to the horror of people I work with, I'm constantly asking one more question and needing one more piece of information, because I do believe that we have to be driven by facts and data in our decision making. And we are held to a higher standard because we are lobbied a lot to make decisions based on persuasion or personality. We have to really be steeled against that and make sure that our decisions are fact-based. And then the final thing I think that's been really helpful is I've been on the other side. So I've run an agency, and I know what it is like, that there can sometimes be a disconnect between City Hall and agencies, which doesn't help the general public. So I really think that my role is to support the agencies. And that's, I think, the part that has been a bigger surprise to me. The level of support and that you can bring to an agency to get through projects, and the level of support that you can bring by coordinating with agencies and reminding everyone that the public doesn't care what your acronyms are, they just want to see the project get done, is really not only much higher than I think I anticipated, but much more necessary than I think I anticipated. And it's also really gratifying, because it is really gratifying to see agencies work together to the public good. It's really what the public needs in order to have confidence in government. But it is an amazing job with an amazing mayor who is decisive, who is curious, who is interested, and truly has the best interest of New Yorkers in his heart.
That's great. I have a fast fact for you. You are tied for the third. You're tied with three lectures on our City Law series with Carl Weisbrod. So you and Carl, you're in very good company.
Yes.
We were commenting, it's like an SNL. How many times has someone guessed SNL? But that is nice. And I do want to just comment for our students who are watching, you are a lawyer.
Yes.
You have an extraordinary background as a lawyer, clerked the Third Circuit. It's really interesting how you see so many high-level public servants who have that legal background and have used it in extraordinary ways in operational roles and senior management roles that it's nice. And of course, government it makes the laws, but it is founded on the law. So I think it leads to great effectiveness in municipal operations in particular. So thank you for being with us today. It was a pleasure as always, and we appreciate the good work that you do each and every day and how much you care. And we look forward to more City Law Breakfast with you. And I appreciate your comments about the City Law Breakfast series, because that is our goal, to really give in-depth, incisive information about how government works, and to be honest and real about it, but also to celebrate victories as well, because there are many, and the public needs to know that. So thanks so much. Ross?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. This was an extraordinarily interesting breakfast. You covered important topics, and I'm so delighted you did. And let me say also thank you for the really kind comments at the beginning. We've been doing this with the goals in mind exactly as you described them, and I'm delighted that you've been here 3 times, and I'm looking forward to your 4th appearance. Thank you so much, everybody. We will be back again with a new City Law Breakfast. Thank you for all attending.
Thank you.